But I will say there was two things. When you're calving and rotating, it can be a real pain in the butt. But our saving grace was we had a lot of hairy vetch out there. Hairy vetch is very viney, and so when we have these cows out there for, I don't know, say 7 to 10 days, that vetch, because the cows are covering all the ground, that vetch was helping pull down all that rye. So we could tell, okay, when you could see everything, I mean, it was all down on the ground, it was time to move them, and then we could pull the baby calves out there, because otherwise it would have been very difficult to get them out of there. So anyway, that's just some personal experience. So forage for all classes of livestock, that's a really good thing at the end of summer, when typically our average daily gains are going down. You can bump those gains back up, so it's forage for them as well. And then incidental cover crops. Just to give you an example, one that's actually not too incidental, and somebody was asking about it earlier, crabgrass. That's one that you can just about count on. Okay, well, graze it like a cover crop. Keep enough forage out there that is also benefiting your soil microbes, shading the ground. That works really well. That's what we use it for that as well. Failed crop, that could also be an incidental cover crop. Just be careful, on what it is. If you've sprayed any chemicals on it, you might need to be cautious, because there may be some grazing intervals that you have to pull cattle or keep cattle off of it for a time period before you can actually graze it. If it's something that might have nitrates or prussic acid, you may need to test that before you put cattle on it as well. So those are just some of the opportunities that can be provided with cover crops. Okay, so now you've got this wonderful cover crop, and you're wanting to put livestock back into the system like we were talking about, all the speakers before me. This is an ecosystem. So typically, I can say with probably 90% of the ecosystems in the world, they have some sort of large herbivore on there. So if it's just been cropped and you don't have livestock on it, you're missing a key component. So we're going to go from this on the left to putting livestock on it on the right. And I'm just going to walk you through a method that I use with producers on how to get cattle on the land. How do we come up with a stocking rate? And if you want to graze it for just one long time period, or do you want to rotate through it? We'll have some examples here. Okay, whoops, I'm carried away. Okay, so the tools that I use for determining production are these up here, and over on the right I've also got some approximate costs for each of these. So I got a couple of spring gram scales, 100 gram and a 2,000 gram, and then I have a open-ended clipping frame at the very top. It's 1.92 square foot, it's 11.5 inches by 24 inches inside dimensions. Pretty easy to make with just some PVC, and I use this clipping frame that's open-ended because if you've been around cover crops much at all, they get pretty tall, and it's easy just to kind of slide that frame down in there, get it on the ground. It's 1.92 because with that size frame, then when I clip grams and dry it down, then I can go from grams to pounds per acre with my conversion factor of 50 with this 1.92 square foot. Okay, other things you're going to need. 100-foot tape measure is what I use. If you don't have a 100-foot tape measure, just get a 100-foot length of rope or something long like that, and then put knots in it or something for a predetermined mark of where you're going to take your clipping samples. Reduces the bias. Let me tell you, because if you get out there and decide, okay, I'm going to clip this, you can look around and go, oh, but if I clip over here, I'm going to have a lot more production than over here. So you just go ahead, predetermine. What I do is there's certain foot marks that I clip out when I put it down, and I'll get into that later. And then you're going to need, I prefer a hand pruner. I've used grass shears before because I do a lot of clipping out in range. But the grass pruners work, or the hand pruners work a lot better because the cover crops have a larger stem base. If you're thinking about clipping something like a Sudan sorghum plant or millets or even sunflowers or okra or something like that, they have a pretty big plant base. It's really hard to get that with a grass shear, but these pruners do just a great job on it. And then you're going to need some bags. You can have plastic grocery store bags. Usually the bigger ones are better. Have plenty of those along because they tend to rip. Or a cloth sack, like things that you pick up at trade shows. Those work great too as well. So those are the tools that I use. Okay, and then we go out on a cover crop field and we select an area that looks pretty representative, or if you have different parts of the field look a little bit different, you're going to pick, several different areas. Okay, so you lay out that tape. I angle typically across the rows, and then it's a good idea to anchor your sides of the tape down. If you don't have people out there helping you, then something like a stake or a couple of tread-in posts to anchor the ends of your tape work great. And then I'll put my clipping frame down, and I center them on the predetermined marks. You can't really see my tape here because it's a cover crop, but that's actually what we're doing. So I'll show you what this looks like. This is where I don't know if you can barely see my frame there. And we've put that down on the ground, and so I'm only clipping vegetation that is rooted within the frame. And then I clip at least 10 frames per field, and so we're weighing and recording the sample weight from each clip frame, and then I keep 5 of those clip samples that are pretty representative of the field. I want the species that I typically see out there, I want those in my samples. So those are the samples that I'm keeping, and I'm marking which of those samples I'm keeping, because I have to have a wet weight and I have to have a dry weight on those. And so if you got millet or sorghum Sudan species in there, or anything like, I can say okra, sunflower, something with a large stem base, I will tell you to chop it up in small pieces. And that way you can get it dried down in the summertime in about 7 days or so. In the winter, in cooler times, it may take a little bit longer than that. Another thing I was going to say, when you dry these down, if you're using plastic bags, take them out of the plastic bag. Maybe use like a grocery store. The paper sacks work really good, because you don't want your sample stuffed in there. You want to have a lot of air in there, because and I've done this before too, if you stuff too much of a sample into a bag, it won't dry, it will mold. And that's not what you want. Okay, so this gets us to our formula for stock density in pounds live weight per acre. And that's going to be forage production in pounds per acre times your utilization rate divided by the average daily intake or percent body weight times your grazing period length. So the first thing we're looking at is our forage production. To record all the weights, and this is the form I use for determining the dry matter to calculate my pounds per acre. So I got my date up here, my bag tear weight, that's just the weight of the bag that I'm using that I put my clipping sample in, clipping frame size, because there are different frame sizes. And so I got a 1.92 square foot frame. Here's my conversion factor right here. I've written down what the cover crop mix is. I've got 2 transects. Each one of those has got 5 samples apiece. I typically clip at 15, 30, 45, 60, and 75 foot. So then we've recorded the grams in the bag of each sample. And then it's G minus BWT. This is my grams minus my bag tear weight. So this is the actual sample weight, the wet weight. These samples right here are the 5 that I'm keeping, so I've got an asterisk by them. And so the total weight of these right here, the wet weight right here, is 3,165 grams. When they dried down, they were 769 grams. So this is what I use to come up with percent dry matter. It's your dry weight divided by your wet weight times 100. So we've done that here with our 769 grams divided by 3,165 grams times 100. So our dry matter percent for this particular mix right here is 24.3% dry matter. And then I take the average of my 10 samples here, my wet weight. The average was 558 grams. I multiply that by the dry matter we came up with, and then my conversion factor, and so that gets me from grams to 6,780 pounds per acre was my total production here. Okay, the next thing we're talking about is utilization rate and a little bit of pounds too. Okay, so how much production are we going to allocate to grazing? In Oklahoma, NRCS wants to maintain 2,000 pounds on the ground, and that is because we've seen a lot of producers at some of the pictures that Caleb showed, is that, I think that first slide he had up there that was wheat pasture that was grazed, and you can see a whole bunch of bare ground. That's not what we want to do. So we're going to maintain 2,000 pounds on per acre. And so we take that directly off our total forage production. That gets us to 4,780 pounds per acre. Now this is a table over here from the Grass of Stockman's Crop, adapted from some research that Kreider did in 1955, having to do with percent leaf volume removed. And so what he found is that once you get over 50%, down to 60 and more, you start having your root growth stopping. Okay, we're talking about soil health, so the last thing we want to do is impact our root growth, because that's where we got a lot of carbon formation going on, soil aggregation, soil glues going on, so we don't want to shut that down at all. So the max you want to use is 50% utilization, because you want to maintain that living, growing root. So we're going to use utilization of 50% on this right here. Okay, we've kind of built in a buffer here of 2,000 pounds. So if you take half of that, 4,780 pounds, that's 2,390 pounds. If you divide that by our total forage production, we come up with 35% leaf volume that's going to be used. Okay, we're in the zeros. We're not going to be impacting our root growth at all whatsoever. It's where we want to be. Okay, so the next thing we're looking at is going to be our average daily intake and a percent of body weight. Okay, and the example I'm using is going to be beef cattle. So beef cattle, and it's going to vary. Dry cows, it can be 2% to 2.5% of your body weight. A lactating cow, around 3%. And the example I'm using, we're going to be using cow-calf pairs, so we're going to use 3%. If you got stockers or finishing cattle, that's going to be 3.5% of their body weight. And then the last thing we're looking at is grazing period length. Okay, and this is just right off the bat, our grazing period length. We have a cover crop for 150 acres, and we're going to have access to the entire field for 45 days. So, like several people here said, they just, turn them out into the pasture or the crop field for the certain amount of days and it's continuous stocking. Hey, I am tickled pink. You have got livestock on the land, and you're going to be having some good things happening. So this is how our formula ends up. We've populated everything, 4,780 pounds times 50% utilization divided by 0.03% body weight for 45 days. So that gives us a stock density that we can handle 1,770 pounds of live weight per acre. Okay, and if you want to know how many pounds total that is, we multiply it by 150 acres. That gives us 265,500 pounds. We're using cow-calf pairs that can be stocked. Okay, well, to figure out how many pairs that is, we're going to make an assumption that our cows weigh 1,100 pounds, the calves weigh 350, so that gives us a total of 1,450 per pair. So then we go back and we take our herd weight that we can have out there, and then we divide that by our pair weight. So we can run 183 cow-calf pairs for 45 days. Okay, this is just kind of a rule of thumb because weights are going to be changing, but this is a place to start from. Okay, and I will say there's some things going on here. Okay, so you've got livestock on the land, but you have them out here for 45 days, so you're probably going to have some uneven distribution of manure and urine. They're probably going to concentrate it more around the watering areas, or say, for instance, if you've got a tree that's in your fence somewhere, they're probably going to concentrate in the shade, and you'll have more manure and urine distribution there. And you don't get quite as good a graze-to-trample ratio. But I'm happy because you've got livestock on the land. So if you want to do a little bit better, if you want to challenge, then let's get into doing some subdividing. And if your cattle are not used to being bunched together and grouped up tight, then I'm going to tell you, don't just throw them in there in daily moves. We're going to start with a 5-day graze first. Okay, so we changed, and this is now 5 days instead of 45, and so this bumps up our pounds per acre. And so now, to find out how many acres we need per graze period, you take that total herd weight that we can have out there divided by the 15,993 pounds. We're going to need just a little bit over 16.5 acres needed for that 5-day graze period. Okay, and that's good. So what we're doing here is we've gone from having them access to the entire field with maybe some, well, I know we're going to have some spotty manure and urine distribution, to we're starting to group them up, and so we'll get a better graze-to-trample ratio. We'll get a lot more uniform manure and urine deposition. And if you really want to see some significant changes in your soil health, you need to look at being about 30,000 to 50,000 pounds per acre stock density. So let's go to 3 days and bump it up to that. We're at almost 27,000 pounds. We're bumping that 30,000 pound mark. Okay, and so that's for 3 days. We're going to need 10 acres for 3 days. And then if you want to go ahead and bump it up to 1 and see what kind of stock density we have there, we're almost at 80,000 pounds per acre. And in order to do that for a 1-day move, we need almost 3.5 acres are needed for a 1-day move. And so some of the things that we're going to see, these pictures were taken on Jimmy Emmons' place, and this is on a 3-day move. And so you see there's still quite a bit of standing forage. There's a lot of forage on the ground. This is taken straight down on the ground. You don't hardly see any bare soil there at all. So this is what we're wanting to see. So you're getting trampling down on the ground. That's also getting vegetation down there. Some of this is going to senesce, die, decompose, and start feeding your soil community down below. And dung beetles. I love dung beetles, especially after what Scott told me about, or Greg told me about the 48 to 40, or the upper 40s in water infiltration in inches per hour. That is amazing. Just that right there should challenge you to make you want to maybe subdivide your field just a little bit more so you can get a better manure distribution and urine distribution out there. So here's a dung beetle right here. This is in the cow pie. If you start seeing, here's a dung pile. This has been here for probably about 8 days. You'll notice it looks like it's shredded. What I don't see in this one is sometimes you'll see little piles of dirt here and here and here. And so this is evidence of dung beetle activity. And I'm going to say, in order to get dung beetle activity, you need to be careful about what you're putting on your cows. Pesticides and insecticides, because those sides will get beneficial organisms and take them out of the system. So think about what you're doing with your cattle and what you're putting on them, because these can really have a big impact on your soil health. So dung beetles, there's tunnelers, there's rollers, and there's dwellers. I'm guessing this one is a dweller, just hanging out in the dung pie. The tunnelers and rollers, they both roll a dung ball. The tunnelers tend to go straight underneath the manure pat and dig down, and they may dig down several feet. And so, like Greg said, this is really impacting your soil infiltration rate with water. And then your rollers, you see a lot of those. They roll it and they roll it away quite a ways, and then they'll bury it somewhere else. So they are getting manure in direct contact with your soil microbial community, and they are ramping it up when that happens. And so this is a good way to get more organic matter going, more soil aggregation with dung beetles. And there's other things. I mean, other things were mentioned are worms, and there's other insects and other things going on to do the same as well. These are some tunnelers we took pictures of. We dug down in the soil right underneath the manure patch. There's a green one right here, and here's its channel. There's a dung ball right there. This way we took a shovel and dug down, and this is 8 inches below the soil surface. So they're punching some really big holes in there. And they're taking this manure and putting it down in the ground. So they're doing a couple things here for you. Besides getting that fertilizer down in the ground, for plant uptake, for your soil community, they're also drying out those manure pats. So you should be having less of a fly problem. Even though you may still have part of the manure pile there, you have enough activity going on that they're aerating it. They're making it less of a beneficial habitat for flies. So there's several things going on here. Now, if you're really serious about getting livestock back on the land and seeing a lot of rapid improvement, is mob grazing. Now, this is a photo courtesy of Jay Fuhrer. This is on Gabe Brown's ranch, and this is mob grazing with probably about 250,000 pounds of live weight per acre. Significant gains in your soil structure, your soil organic matter, water infiltration rate, but it is going to require a lot more management. You're going to have multiple daily moves when you do this. And then there's this thing called adaptive high stock density grazing. Dr. Alan Williams discusses this a lot, and so it's kind of, you're marrying mob grazing with some still 30 to 50,000 pound per acre grazing, and sometimes it's very adaptive, so it's not always going to be at this rate. You may mob graze for 3 to 5 days or longer. It's kind of like a big push, like when you're putting up hay or when you're planting. I mean, you're spending some long hours out there, and so this is something where you could do the same thing. You allocate some time to it, but you do it for 3 to 5 days. You're targeting specific acres on your farm that you want to do this to, and then the rest of the time you may be doing the 30 to 50,000 pound per acre, or it may be less. It just depends. What does your livestock need? What does the land need? So it may not be always a high densities. It can be less than that. So in summary, we looked at cover crops, how to graze them, how to calculate some stocking rates, so that you can use those cover crops that have an extra amount of biomass out there. You can use them to graze and increase their soil health, and then realize a return for their cost. So you can use the method presented here step by step, or you can be flexible. You can just kind of wing it and do some eyeballing of what your production is and how long you think your cattle will be on a certain amount of land, whether you want to allocate that out in strip grazing or several days at a time. You can be flexible and ready to move stuff. But the main thing I want you to remember is you got two sets of livestock. You've got one above the ground and you've got one below the ground. And you need to manage them so that they are both working together as nature intended. So here's a little bit of literature I cited. And this right here, if you're interested in this adaptive high stock grazing density, go to this pasture project, pastureproject.org. You can do some good reading there. They have a lot of resources.